From the day she was born, I treated my daughter like treasure. She was the youngest of my 4 children, the only girl among 3 boys, and I admit I spoiled her more than I should have. While her brothers learned responsibility through chores and consequences, I found myself making excuses for her mistakes. When she turned 18, I started giving her small responsibilities with important documents and teaching her about bank accounts because I wanted her to grow into a woman who could stand strong in the world. I thought I was protecting her future by teaching her responsibility early. I never imagined that trust would one day become the weapon she'd use against me. But life has a cruel way of showing you who someone really is when money enters the picture. And soon, I would learn just how far she was willing to go. When she turned 21, I started noticing changes in how she talked about money. She spoke of my pension as if it were her future spending money, discussing my investments like they were already hers to inherit. "When you're gone, Dad, I'll make sure everything gets handled properly," she'd say, patting me with what I thought was caring concern. At family dinner, she'd steer conversations toward my retirement accounts and life insurance policies, asking detailed questions that seemed thoughtful at the time. I brushed off these conversations as normal curiosity from a young adult learning about financial planning. I told myself it was just youthful impatience, nothing more serious than wanting to understand her future security. I didn't see that her entitlement was already blooming into something much darker. Until one day, that darkness showed up in black and white. The news didn't reach me from her mouth. It came through my friend Jake, who worked in the county records office. His voice was shaky when he called that Tuesday morning. "I don't know how to tell you this, Frank, but your death certificate was filed last week." The words hit me like a physical blow. My knees nearly buckled as I gripped the kitchen counter. "What do you mean filed?" I whispered. "Someone reported you deceased on March 15th. All your accounts are being flagged for estate processing." My hands trembled as I wrote down the case number he gave me. To see my name listed as dead while I was breathing, standing, alive in my own kitchen, felt like the ground had swallowed me whole. My own daughter had killed me on paper. And the worst part was, no one else even knew I was still alive in the system. I didn't rush to confront her immediately. Instead, I sat in my living room chair, clutching that copy of the death certificate Jake had rushed over to me. There it was, in official black ink. Franklin James Morrison, deceased March 15th, 2024. The signature at the bottom made my blood run cold. It was hers, signing as my next of kin, authorizing the filing. I imagined bankers, insurance agents, and government officials all believing I was gone, processing my accounts as if I were buried 6 feet underground. That humiliation burned hotter than anger. The woman I'd raised had erased me from existence with a pen stroke. I stayed quiet for 3 days, letting the reality sink in, because I knew confronting her in rage would get me nowhere. If she wanted to play games with official documents, I would show her who was better at playing that game. I asked myself a question that kept me awake for nights. If she could erase me on paper, what stopped her from wanting to erase me for real? The thought made my stomach turn, but I couldn't shake it. If I let this slide, was I inviting something worse in the future? What would stop her from deciding that waiting for my natural death was taking too long? I loved my daughter deeply, but love doesn't mean blind acceptance of betrayal. That Thursday night, as I sat staring at her childhood photos on the mantel, I made a decision that felt like cutting out part of my heart. Her lesson wouldn't come from words or disappointed lectures. It would come from experiencing the exact consequences her actions deserved. But to pull it off, I would need someone on the inside.
Just before you continue to watch, Joe would like you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage him to keep his streak of thrilling revenge stories for you to watch. All right, back to the story.
My daughter had one constant in her life, her best friend, Tasha Williams. They'd been inseparable since high school, sharing everything from shopping trips to late-night phone calls that could last for hours. I knew that if anyone held the complete truth of what my daughter had done and why she'd done it, it was that friend. Tasha had been around our family for years, eating Sunday dinners at our table, borrowing money for gas, treating our home like her second residence. If I wanted to teach my daughter a lesson that would truly reach her, I needed to step into that inner circle of trust. I needed someone who could get close enough to record the truth. So I picked up the phone and dialed the number that could change everything. I called Tasha on her cell phone, asking her to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. She seemed nervous when she arrived, probably wondering why I'd reached out directly instead of going through my daughter. My voice stayed steady as I laid out exactly what my daughter had done, showing her copies of the forged death certificate. Tasha's face went pale as she read the documents. "Help me set her up," I said quietly, "and I'll make sure your cooperation is noted when this goes to court." The silence stretched between us for almost a full minute. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't think she'd actually go through with it." Those words hit me like ice water. She had known this was coming, and just like that, I had an ally who could give me something even more valuable than cooperation. But her first full confession nearly broke me in half. Tasha's hands shook as she started talking. She told me my daughter had been planning this for months, researching the process, even practicing forging my signature on scrap paper. The worst part came when Tasha described how my daughter had laughed about it after filing the paperwork. "She said it was just moving some numbers around," Tasha whispered, not meeting my eyes. She called it early inheritance and joked that you'd never know the difference since you barely checked your accounts anyway. Hearing that my daughter had turned my trust into a punchline broke something inside me that I didn't know could break. The girl I'd raised had convinced herself that erasing me was harmless, just paperwork that wouldn't really hurt anyone. I clenched my jaw and told Tasha we were going to turn that laughter into tears. The stage was set, now it was time to build the trap. I spent the next week building an airtight case. I contacted Detective Ray Collins, an old friend from my construction days who now worked fraud investigations. When I showed him the forged death certificate and bank access attempts, his expression turned grim. "This isn't just fraud, Frank. This is identity theft, forgery, and attempted theft of estate assets. We can arrest her tonight if you want." But I had a better idea. I wanted her to experience the same shock and betrayal she'd given me. Together, we crafted an arrest warrant and planned the operation. The timing had to be perfect. All we needed was to lure my daughter to the right place at the right time. And that place would be her best friend's apartment, where she'd feel completely safe and unsuspecting. She would walk straight into it, smiling and carefree. Tasha played her role like an actress. "Come over Friday night," she told my daughter over the phone while I listened on speaker. "Just a chill hangout, maybe order some pizza and watch movies." There was no suspicion in my daughter's voice, no hesitation. "Sounds perfect. I need to unwind after this crazy week." If only she knew how much crazier it was about to get. Meanwhile, I coordinated with Detective Collins to have officers stationed around the building. The warrant was signed, the evidence was documented, and the trap was armed and ready. I parked 2 blocks away, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the digital clock on my dashboard count down to 7 o'clock. And when she arrived, she would never forget what followed. The evening came with clear skies and a cool March breeze. I parked where I could see Tasha's apartment building, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I watched and waited. At exactly 7:15, my daughter's red Honda pulled into the parking lot, music thumping from her speakers. She stepped out wearing her favorite jacket, the one I'd bought her for Christmas, completely carefree and unsuspecting. She strolled up to the building entrance, checking her phone and smiling at something she was reading. 2 minutes after she disappeared inside, red and blue lights flooded the parking lot from 3 different directions. My chest tightened as I watched patrol cars surround the building. This was it. Justice was finally walking toward my child, and there was no turning back. But nothing could have prepared me for the look on her face when the door burst open.
The knock on Tasha's apartment door came like thunder. I could hear it even from my car 2 blocks away. "Police, open up." Officers rushed in with voices sharp and commands echoing down the hallway. Through Tasha's window, I could see my daughter's silhouette freeze in complete shock. Her casual laughter died in her throat immediately. "What's going on?" she stammered, and I could hear the tremor in her voice, even through the chaos. Then she saw Tasha standing by the kitchen counter, holding up her cell phone with the red recording light blinking. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her best friend had been recording everything, waiting for this exact moment. Her scream of pure betrayal in that moment still rings in my ears. Her face collapsed completely when she understood that her best friend had orchestrated this trap. "You set me up," she choked out, pointing a shaking finger at Tasha. "How could you do this to me?" The betrayal cut her deeper than the flashing handcuffs, deeper than the officers reading her rights. In that moment, her entire world shifted. Her best friend was gone, police were swarming the apartment, and all her careful lies were crumbling around her feet like broken glass. I watched through my windshield as they led her out in handcuffs, her head hanging low, her confident swagger replaced by the stumbling walk of someone whose legs could barely support them. That was the moment she truly understood that the walls had closed in around her. And then she called out the one name I didn't expect to hear. As the officers guided her toward the patrol car, she started sobbing and screaming my name into the night air. "Daddy! Daddy, please help me! I'm sorry!" She tried calling me by the sweet nicknames she'd used as a little girl, the ones that used to melt my heart when she scraped her knee or had a nightmare. "Papa, please, I didn't mean for this to happen." For just a moment, my chest tightened with memories of bedtime stories, piggyback rides, and the way she used to curl up in my lap during thunderstorms. The father in me wanted to run to her, to shield her from the harsh reality of consequences. But I forced myself to stay in that car, engine off, watching from a distance. She hadn't called me daddy when she was signing my death certificate. Now she was about to learn exactly who I had become. Detective Collins called me as they drove her to the station. "She's asking for you, Frank. Wants to know if you'll come down and talk to her." I sat in my car for another hour, wrestling with the choice that would define both our futures. When I finally arrived at the booking office, he asked if I wanted to press full charges or if family considerations might lead to a lesser punishment. I stood there in that fluorescent-lit hallway, split down the middle between the father who wanted to protect his child and the man who had been betrayed in the cruelest way possible. Every instinct I'd developed over 21 years of parenting screamed at me to soften the blow, to find a way to shield her from the full weight of adult consequences. But I knew that letting her walk away from this would teach her that betrayal had no real price. And once I spoke the words, there would be no taking them back. "I won't shield her from this anymore," I told Officer Martinez, my voice steadier than I felt inside. The words felt like cutting my own flesh, but I knew they were necessary. For years, I had covered for her mistakes, paid her overdraft fees, made excuses for her skipped responsibilities and small lies. I had convinced myself that protecting her from consequences was what good fathers did. But this wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated crime that had taken months of planning. She had researched how to forge official documents and practiced my signature until she could reproduce it perfectly. For the first time in her life, I stepped back and let the world deal with her actions instead of cushioning the impact. And the world showed her absolutely no mercy. I followed the patrol car to the county jail, staying far enough back that she wouldn't see me, but close enough to witness every moment of her journey into custody. Through the rear window, I could see her slumped forward, her shoulders shaking with tears that streaked her makeup down her cheeks. Every red light felt like an eternity. At one point, she turned and looked directly at me through the glass, her eyes pleading and desperate. I wanted to knock on that window, to reach through and hold her hand, to tell her that everything would somehow be okay. But that would have been a lie. Nothing was okay anymore between us, and sugarcoating that reality wouldn't help either of us heal from what she'd done.
The trust that had taken 21 years to build had been shattered in a single afternoon, and things were only about to get much worse for her. Word spread through our community faster than I expected. By the next morning, neighbors were whispering on their front porches, and my phone was buzzing with calls from relatives who'd heard the news. "Your daughter did what?" My eldest son, Marcus, barked over the phone, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Filed a fake death certificate? Are you kidding me right now?" The shame wasn't really mine to carry, but it settled on my shoulders anyway, like a heavy coat I couldn't take off. My other sons were equally stunned, asking me to repeat the story multiple times as if hearing it again might make it make sense. I found myself explaining the same details over and over: the forged signature, the bank access attempts, and the recorded conversations where she had laughed about the whole scheme. The gavel echoed through the courtroom when Judge Walsh ordered her held without bail until sentencing. My heart cracked watching her shoulders shake, but my resolve remained solid. Next came the testimony that would destroy her completely. When Tasha took the witness stand 2 days later, the betrayal deepened into something almost unbearable to watch. With her right hand on the Bible, she repeated every boastful word my daughter had shared about the scheme. She said it was easy money, Tasha testified, her voice barely above a whisper. Just a piece of paper that would unlock accounts her dad barely looked at anyway. She told me he'd never even know it happened. My daughter buried her face in her hands at the defense table, her whole body shaking as her own words came back to condemn her. I watched her shoulders heave with silent sobs, knowing that hearing the mirror of her own cruel confidence was the knife cutting deepest of all. The prosecutor asked for specific quotes, and Tasha delivered them with devastating accuracy. My daughter truly believed that erasing me was a victimless crime, a clever shortcut to money she felt entitled to inherit. And yet, even after all this evidence, she wasn't done begging me for mercy. The letters from jail started arriving within a week of her arrest. Page after page of handwritten apologies, each one more desperate than the last. "Dear Daddy," she wrote in her familiar handwriting, "I know what I did was wrong, but I only wanted to feel financially secure. I didn't think about how it would hurt you or make you feel erased. I was just scared about my future." She wrote about the stress of college loans, the pressure of finding a good job, the fear that she'd never be able to afford the lifestyle she wanted. Each letter painted her crime as a moment of panic rather than months of calculated planning. I read all of them, but I didn't respond to any of them. Forgiveness without consequences is just permission to hurt you again, and I couldn't give her permission to kill me twice. Her letters kept coming like clockwork, but the sentencing date was creeping closer with each passing day.
The sentencing hearing arrived on a Thursday morning in late April. Judge Walsh's voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom as she read the decision. 2 years in state prison, with the possibility of early release for cooperation and good behavior. The words hit the room like a physical force. My daughter collapsed forward, wailing so loudly that the bailiff had to step closer to her table. Her public defender put a hand on her shoulder, but she was beyond consolation. The reality of 2 years behind bars had finally broken through whatever fantasies she'd been holding on to. The courtroom fell silent except for her crying, a sound that cut through me like broken glass. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, maybe now she'll understand what it means to erase someone. But the ache in my chest didn't allow me to feel any satisfaction, and my sons made sure I didn't forget the harsh reality of what had happened. My 3 sons gathered at my house that evening, their faces grim with anger that hadn't cooled since the arrest. "You should have cut her off years ago, Dad," Marcus said, pacing around my living room like a caged animal. "All that spoiling and special treatment led to this." James nodded grimly. "She tried to erase you from existence, Dad. Don't you dare forget that when you start feeling sorry for her." Anthony was the harshest of all. 2 years isn't enough for what she did. In my book, she's not our sister anymore. They saw her purely as a criminal now, not as their baby sister who used to follow them around the yard begging to join their games. I realized that betrayal doesn't just wound the victim, it shatters entire families, turning siblings against each other and forcing everyone to choose sides. The dinner table would never be the same, with one chair permanently empty and 3 sons who'd written their sister off completely. And late at night, I wondered if they were right to be so harsh. At night, alone in my house, I found myself staring at the empty chair where she used to sit during family dinners. I could still picture her there in age 7, spinning spaghetti on her fork and chattering about her school day. I remember teaching her to ride a bike in our driveway, running behind her with my hand on the seat until she was steady enough to pedal on her own. Those golden memories crashed against the image of her in handcuffs, creating a painful contradiction I couldn't resolve. Had my gentleness made her entitled? Had my protection from consequences taught her that actions didn't matter? I replayed every choice I had made as her father, wondering if somewhere along the way I'd failed to teach her basic right from wrong. The questions haunted me through sleepless nights, but the answer came when I saw her again through prison glass several months later. I stood in the prison visiting room 8 months after her sentencing, looking at my daughter through reinforced glass that reflected both our faces. She had lost weight and her hair hung limp around shoulders that seemed smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, she pressed her palm against the glass and mouthed the word "Daddy" with tears spilling down her cheeks. Her orange jumpsuit was wrinkled, her face pale from months without sunlight. I nodded once in acknowledgement, but didn't smile, didn't soften my expression with false comfort. She had tried to erase me from the world, to kill me on paper, so she could spend my life savings before my body was even cold. But I was still here, still breathing, still very much alive. And now she knew with absolute certainty that the man she had buried on paper would never forget what it cost her to try. The glass between us wasn't just a prison barrier. It was the permanent distance that betrayal creates, a wound that never fully heals. Because some lessons about family loyalty are written in scars that never fade.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check out other videos on the channel. Joe's got more interesting stories for you.